Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers, to our Islam study session. This session will begin with the recital and translation and a short explanation from the Quran. And I have chosen some verses from Surah Hujurat, to be precise, verse 11 and 12. You can see that, and I'm sure you must have gone through these verses a number of times. These verses have a strong message for all of us regarding our interpersonal relationships. We know that the life that we all spend, we come across people, we come across our family, our friends, our children, our spouse, our siblings, parents. So we have these interpersonal relations in a very, very close manner, in a very, very intimate manner as well, and also in a broad way. So what happens is that our interaction with people produces a lot of goodwill. It can produce a lot of goodwill, and it can also generate a lot of mistrust and discomfort. So these verses of Surah Hujurat meant to be studied every now and then, and to be written in golden words and to be taught to our children, actually spell out some of the pitfalls, some of the areas in which we are not very careful in our interpersonal relationships, especially in our attitudes, and especially in what we say through our tongues. So the verses begin by Ya ayyuhallazina amanu la yaskhar qawmun min qawmin asa an yakunu khayran minhum wala nisa'un min nisa'in asa an yakunna khayran minhunna ولا تلمزوا أنفسكم ولا تنابزوا بالألقاب بئس الاسم الفسوق بعد الإيمان ومن لم يتب فأولئك هم الظالمون يا أيها الذين آمنوا اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعد الظن إثم ولا تجسسوا ولا يغتب بعضكم بعضا أيحب أحدكم أن يأكل لحم أخيه ميتا فكرهتموه وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ تَوَّابٌ رَحِيمٌ. Believers, men should not make fun of other men, for they may be better than themselves, and women should not make fun of other women, for they may be better than themselves. And do not be disdainful to one another, nor call one another with bad names. After embracing faith, even the mention of disobedience is bad. Those who do not repent from this are indeed wrongdoers. Believers, avoid being overly speculative, for some speculations are a blatant sin, and do not spy on one another. And no one among you should indulge in backbiting. And no one among you should indulge in backbiting. And no one among you should indulge in backbiting others. Would any one of you like to eat the flesh of his dead brother? So you would detest it. Fear God. God is most forgiving and ever merciful. So, dear viewers, you can clearly see that these verses have a huge message for all of us, and what they really tell us is that we have to be careful with our tongues. We have to be careful not to hurt other people. So the biggest thing, or the most used weapon which can hurt other people, is the way we talk to them, is the way we converse them. And look, these verses start off with the thing that is most common to all of us, which all of us indulge in a lot, and we need to be extremely careful about, and that is, we should not make fun of one another. When we make fun of one another, of course, this is a ring of arrogance in it, and we think ourselves to be superior to others, and we think that the other people are inferior, and because of some situational happening or some other deformity maybe, or some other happening, we do tend to make fun of each other and mock at each other. And the verse actually tells us that apparently what is apparent should not always be thought to be what is real, because at times you might make fun of a person because of his stature, because of his conversation, because of what he says, and in the sight of God, that person could be far superior to you than yourself. So it says that asa an yakunu khayran minhum. This is always the case, that when you make fun of the other person, you think that he is a fool, and you think yourselves to be superior. So the verse here, these verses here actually tell us that this is something that we should avoid. And it is here that, dear participants, that men and women both are mentioned separately. Women are equally addressed and said that they also should not indulge in making fun of other people, of other women. So you see, the important thing here is that men should not mock men and women should not mock women. They should not make fun of other women. And in both cases, the reason which is given is that the one that you're making fun of might be better in the sight of God than yourselves. So I think we should take heed to this wonderful advice by the Almighty and be extremely careful in this regard, because this is something which plagues our gatherings. Whenever we sit, we make fun of a person. We often don't even lose an opportunity whenever it comes our way to mock another person. And then the verse goes on to say, وَلَا تَلْمِزُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. So do not taunt one another. This again is something which we often indulge in. We taunt each other, we pass sarcastic remarks, we are disdainful to other people. We think that this taunt is going to perhaps satisfy our ego and make us superior people. But again, this is something which is far from good and gentlemanly behavior. And then it says, وَلَا تَنَابَزُوا بِالْأَلْقَابِ. Of course, which means that do not call each other by bad names. And of course, this is something, again, that we indulge in a lot. We call each other by various names. We call each other by various names which actually are not liked by that person. He or she might not be in a position to protest or to record his or her protest, but we can clearly see that his or her face, or maybe her inner feelings, or his inner feelings would never ratify or never corroborate what we are calling him by. So we have to be extremely careful that we should not call other people by disdainful names. And this often happens because we do call people by their color, by their height, by the way they are dressed, or by the way their stature is. A person might be short, a person might be fat, a person might be extremely tall, a person might have a different color that you like. So in all these cases, what happens is that we start calling them by different names which actually are meant to belittle them. And it is here that the Quran tells us that this should not happen. And then it says, بِئْسَ الْإِسْمُ الْفُسُوقُ بَعْدَ الْإِيمَانِ. Even the name of fisq, even the name of disobedience is unworthy for a person who has accepted faith. What to be disobedient? So in other words, the name of disobedience is something even worse than disobedience itself. I mean, the act of disobedience. So even the word disobedience is something which should be avoided. What to speak of being disobedient? So, بِئْسَ الْإِسْمُ الْفُسُوقُ بَعْدَ الْإِيمَانِ. And then it says, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَتُبْ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. And those who do not desist from this unseemly behavior, then they should know that they are the ones who are wrongdoers. They are the ones who are unjust to their souls, and they are the ones who need to rectify, reform themselves and become goodly individuals. So this first part of these verses is extremely important for all of us, for our interpersonal, for our social relationships, the way we meet each other, especially our close ones, because these things we might be slightly more reserved when we meet people who are not very well known to us, but we become very impolite when we face people who are either inferior or junior to us in some situation, or they are in a position or in a spot of bother which we can exploit by making fun of. And then the verse goes on to say, Ya ayyuhallazina amanu ijtanibu kathiran min adh-dhann, which means that we must not be overly speculative. We must not be conjectural in our approach. And this, of course, also is another social evil that we come across so commonly, that we conjecture a lot, we speculate a lot. Instead of going through a process of self-accountability and thinking more of our own selves, we are often speculating regarding the other person. We have no definite knowledge, but we speculate, we pick all sorts of faults in him or her without even thinking that this is something which might not be there. It's mere speculation. We speculate on the wealth the person might be acquiring by just saying, oh, he must have done this, and that is why he has become so rich. Oh, he must have done this, or she must have done that, and all sorts of blaming goes on in our minds. And look what the Quran says, inna ba'da zanni ismun, because we should realize that there are certain speculations which in themselves are ism, which are a blatant sin, and we must realize this, that when we are overly speculative, of course this does not mean that we cannot be speculative in certain things. For example, when we are trying to judge someone vis-a-vis appointing him as a person in our employment, or maybe looking for a suitable match. So there are exceptions to this, but when we are speculative merely for the sake of speculation, this is what has been forbidden here. And وَلَا تَجَسَّسُوا, do not pry and spy, and do not be a person who is always in search for the other person, and we actually are a person who have been given to speculations, and this spying also is one of these bad habits that we have. We continue to spy on our children in a bad sense, and then we spy on our spouses, and we spy on our people of close relationship, instead of trusting them, instead of leaving matters to them. Of course, if there is something wrong, then there are better ways to redress the situation instead of spying on other people, and spying for the sake of fault finding especially, and spying for the sake of merely letting that person know that he is someone that he has to be watched over, and you find faults with him, and you would like to impute these faults to him. And then the last thing which is mentioned here, viewers, in this verse is La yaghtab ba'dukum ba'da. And the verse goes on to say that first of all, it says that you should not backbite. Backbiting is something that is so common in our gatherings. Whenever we sit, we have this feeling of backbiting, and backbiting in itself is something horrific. It's appalling. And backbiting means that you mention someone who is not in your own company in a manner which belittles him in his absence, which the mention is such that the purpose is to belittle that person. And this has been regarded as consuming the meat of your dead brother. And I think there's nothing more worse than that. And it has been likened, it has been compared to the fact that when we indulge in backbiting, we actually consume a dead brother's meat. Of course, this is something which we all detest. And the Quran says that such is the heinous nature of backbiting, that it's like consuming the meat of your brother, and therefore we have to be very careful. And it says, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ إِنَّ اللَّهَ تَوَّابٌ رَحِيمٌ, that fear God, and God is most forgiving and ever merciful. I think these verses have to be read again and again. They have to be recited, they have to be discussed. We must keep reminding ourselves of these all important directives of the Quran, and they are ones on which the social fabric of our society is based. If this social fabric is based on these commandments of either adopting certain good behavior and abstaining from certain bad deeds, so this is how we have to be extremely careful. And let's keep on revisiting our attitude every night that we sleep. We must take note of some of these evils that are mentioned here that we might have committed during the day. So the best place or the best time is to actually evaluate ourselves at the very end of the day, and make a fresh commitment when we go to sleep, that we will not indulge in these evils which are mentioned here the next day and the next day. And even if we are not able to honor our commitment, even then we must keep on reviewing and refreshing our commitments, because it is one day, inshallah, that even if despite a lot of trials and errors and a lot of mistakes, that we might be able to conquer these evils. It's not easy because they have become our second nature, but with effort and with a lot of prayer and willpower, we can inshallah surmount these. Now let us move on to the next part of our study circle. This is the hadith of the day, and this hadith has been taken from the Al-Jami' al-Sahih of Imam Bukhari. It says, An Umar radiyallahu anhuma, An Ibn Umar radiyallahu anhuma, qala an-Nabiyyu sallallahu alayhi wa sallam bimina, atadruna ayyu yawmin hadha? قالوا الله ورسوله أعلم قال فإن هذا يوم حرام أفتدرون أي بلد هذا؟ قالوا الله ورسوله أعلم قال بلد حرام أتدرون أي الشهر هذا قالوا الله ورسوله أعلم قال شهر حرام قال فإن الله حرم عليكم دماءكم وأموالكم وأعراضكم كحرمة يومكم هذا في شهركم هذا في بلدكم هذا. So Abdullah ibn Umar anhu stated that the Prophet Muhammad in the sermon of the last Hajj at Mina asked, "Do you know what day this is?" The companions replied, "God and the messenger know." The Prophet remarked, "This is the sacred day." The Prophet, the companions, this is the sacred day, so do you know which city this is this? The companions replied, "God and the messenger know." The Prophet said, "This is the sacred city." And then he again asked, "Do you know which month is this?" The companions replied, "God and the messenger know." The Prophet said, "This is the sacred month." And he further said, "Indeed, God has made your lives, your wealth, your honor as sacred as this day of yours, in this month of yours, in this city of yours." So this is again a very, very important social directive which is given to all of us, and it tells us that not only it reflects on how the companions of the Prophet would behave regarding their Prophet, but also how they would be very, very eager to find out the answer. They would, instead of answering a question from the Prophet, this is often the attitude that they would, whenever they would be asked about something by the Prophet, their reply would be that, "O Prophet, you and your God knows better." And the purpose would be that instead of answering, they would hear the answer of the Prophet himself and thereby accumulate more wisdom. You can see these questions which are being raised by the Prophet in the last Hajj at Mina. And he says that which is this city, which is this day, and which is this month. So all these three things, they hold sanctity. They are sanctimonious in the eyes of God. They are sacred in the eyes of God. The month of Zulhajj is sacred in the eyes of God. The city of Mecca is, of course, very, very important and sacred in the eyes of God. And all these things, they actually reflect that we have to be very, very considerate of the lives of other people, their honor. And as you see that the verse, this hadith says that human life and human wealth and human honor are as sacred as this day of yours, which of course is the day of Hajj, and this month of yours, which is the month of Zulhajj, and this city of yours, which is the city of Mecca. Because all these three, just as all these three entities hold sanctity, on a similar note, the Prophet is reported to have said that just as the city of Mecca is sacred, and just as the month of Zulhajj is sacred, and just as this day of Hajj is sacred, on similar footings, our life is sacred, our wealth is sacred, and our honor is sacred. Which means, of course, that we must not violate the sanctity. We must not indulge in anything which is detrimental to our life in any way, or the life of other people, by threatening them, by taking their lives in any way. Such is the nature of life that the Almighty has made extremely clear, that it is only in certain conditions that life can be exacted. And then, of course, our wealth is something which cannot be tampered with in any way by anyone. And then our honor, our respect, our esteem, it must not be compromised in any way. And of course, you can see that the slant is clearly towards rulers and people who hold authority, and of course people who violate authority, people who take the law in their hands. They are told that such is the sanctity of human life, that it is as sanctimonious, as sacred as the city of Mecca, as the month of Zulhajj, which of course holds an extreme sanctity in the eyes and the sight of God. Let's move on to the Bible verse of the day, and that is has been taken from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter number 7, verses 17 to 20, and I've titled it as "A Righteousness." "For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great God, strong in power and greatly to be feared, who has no respect for any man's position and takes no rewards, judging people uprightly in the cause of the widow and the child who has no father, and giving food and clothing in his mercy to the man from a strange country. So be kind to the man from a strange country who is living among you. For you yourselves were living in a strange country, in the land of Egypt. Let the fear of the Lord your God be before you. Give him worship, and be true to him at all times, taking your oaths in his name." So this, of course, is something which is addressed to the Israelites, and they are told that they must respect the commandments of the Lord, and who himself is strong in power, and he has to be greatly feared, for he can take to task people who cross the limits. And he has, he is someone to whom no one, as he may be as powerful as anyone, he may have any status before the world, but to the Almighty, he's absolutely nothing. He's just a human being. And thus, you see, these verses say that judging people uprightly in the cause of the widow and the orphan. The first thing which is said is that we have to be careful in the rights of the weak, the rights of people who have this weak status in our society, and foremost among them are widows and, of course, orphans, because they are the ones who need the protection of the society. And if we don't judge uprightly in their matter, then we are a society which has turned a deaf ear to one of the most profoundest needs of a society, and that is to help the needy and help the people who are helpless. So helping the helpless, this is something which is a coveted thing and which has been urged upon. And then it says that giving food and clothing in his mercy to the man from a strange country. Of course, here the discussion has a specific context, but what it says is that a person who is maybe a stranger in your country, who has come to you, or in a broader sense, someone who is in need, we have to provide food and clothing as much as we can. We must provide shelter. We must provide the basic necessities of life to that person. And of course, these verses address people in their individual capacities by telling them that as far as they can, they should feed the hungry. They should clothe the people who are not themselves able to clothe themselves. And so be kind to the man from a strange country who's living among you, for you yourselves were living in the land of Egypt. So the Israelites are reminded that when they were living in Egypt in exile, they were aliens, they were strangers, and they were taken care of. So it says that just as the Israelites were living in Egypt as strangers and were taken care of, in a similar manner, when some stranger comes to them, they must realize that this is something which happened to them as well. And then it says that let the fear of God your Lord be before you. Give him worship, and be true to him at all times. We have to be true to the Almighty. We have to worship him. Of course, worshiping the Almighty means that our heart, our inner selves have to be bent down before God. It's not just our body which is to be bent down before the Almighty. It is our inner self, our soul, which must prostrate. Mere prostration of the body will have no bearing if our souls don't prostrate, if our souls are left untended. So this is something which the point has been made a lot of times, and we have to address this situation. Viewers, I would like to also inform you that our first question answer session will be deferred to the end, because we'll have a shorter session this time, because I have to leave for another city today for some sessions. So let me go on to the last part as well, and then in the end, inshallah, we'll have this time to discuss and answer questions. So the topic that I'm going to discuss at the very end is that how to address hopelessness in the society, and how to address this lack of empathy from all of us. And the reason I say this is because when we live in times, we all have our own evaluation of the situation. We are all critical of what is going around us. We might not like our immediate family, some of the bad attitudes which we have faced, maybe from our spouses, or maybe from our children, or our siblings, or our friends, or even from the society at large. But what is to be done? So one outcome of a bleak situation is that you turn pessimistic. You just sit idle. You just start brooding and complaining, and just uttering words which might vent your emotion, which might be cathartic to you, but in the end, they are not going to rectify the situation in any way. So, as we always discussed, is that whatever the situation, how bleak it may be, how hopeless it may be, we have to hope against hope, and we have to light our candle in the darkness around us. Instead of cursing the darkness around us, let's be more positive. Let's light a small matchstick and create a small flame in that darkness, which might at least show us the way, or even be instrumental in showing some of the people near us the way. So instead of just letting ourselves succumbing to the tide of time and showing this helpless behavior, we have to get up and take hold of ourselves and do what we can. You see, you have to remember that man in himself, whether men or women, both have tremendous potentials. We at times do not discover our inner potentials. We at times are not aware of how resilient we are, how strong we are from our inside. It is these testing times which bring out this strength from us. If we become people of crisis, we will find out that we have a lot that we can offer to the society. So the bottom line is that instead of cursing people around us, instead of cursing the situation around us, even the weather around us, the best way is to go about doing what we can. And remember, dear viewers, that we can do a lot. We can do a lot simply by becoming upright individuals, by upholding the truth always, by being just always, by showing compassion, by being kind, by being selfless. A single man can move mountains. A single person can change the situation, because if one person takes this first step, often the silent majority, it awakens from its slumber, and they find someone who inspires them. And this is the importance of just one candle being lighted, because at times people are just waiting for that first flame, and then they gather around that person, and then they are able to actually come together and become a more meaningful mob or a crowd which can really address the situation. So the bottom line is that we have to be positive. We have to be people who are always thinking of coming out of the problem that we are in, and always relying on our own selves, always coming out of those doldrums with a matchstick, with a candle, and showing others the way, leading others the way, and always trusting God that there is something hidden behind these testing times. And if we are able to pass through them, then of course we might even earn a lot of help from the Almighty, and we are able to change the situation. And also remember, dear viewers, that it is the effort that counts before the Almighty. Situations might never change. They might change slowly. They might seldom change. But whatever be the situation outside, the real thing is the effort put in. The real thing is how we take up this situation. If the challenge is thrown towards us, we have to accept the challenge in a gracious way, in a brave way, and face that challenge head on, and try our best and best, because one day we will realize that it is the effort which counts, because we did our best, and we have to leave the rest to God Almighty. So with these words, I'm now available to answer your questions if you have any questions. And I can see Ms. Rafia Khwaja. Okay, I'm going to unmute your mic, please. You can go ahead with your question.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Ji wa Islam. Ji, we can hear you.
Dr. Shehzad, I want to ask you that very often I've heard that when people go for Umrah or Hajj and they pray there, all their sins are forgiven. My question is, what happens to people who can't afford to go for Umrah, Hajj and have committed sins? Cannot they just repent in their prayers and ask God for forgiveness? Or it is only by going to Allah's house that they can be forgiven?
You see, this is this.
The second one?
I think let's take it one by one. Okay. As far as the answer to your first question is concerned, of course, this is a bonus which is placed by the Almighty towards certain people, and there are other people who might not be able to afford to go to Hajj and Umrah. So for them, of course, the exception case is that if they are not able to do that Hajj or Umrah, which they have the strong desire to do so, even their intention of going there and not being going there, but still having the strong intention, will count before the Almighty. And who knows that if not by not going there, but still having that intention, will earn them equal reward. And by reward, I of course mean that the blessings of Umrah, which include the fact that it's like a reset of your lives. But of course, the reset of your lives does not mean that that all sins, come what may, will be forgiven. Often here the implication is that the minor sins are going to be forgiven, which of course relate to God. mostly. But as far as those sins are concerned in which we have done something unjust to people around us, so unless we are able to atone for them and apologize to them, and they accept our apology, and we are also make amends for that, only then they will be forgiven. But as you have asked specifically for the fact that what about people who are not able to go for Umrah, of course they have a lot of other chances as well. But as I said, not going for Umrah and having that intense desire is inshallah going to afford them with the same opportunity. Please go ahead.
Dr. Shehzad, no, my question was that, some people here, they are corrupt. They do all sorts of sin in their present life, but can't go for Umrah. They may steal, they may do zina, they may do anything. But my question was that can't they repent in their prayers and God will inshallah forgive them?
Yes, I said yes, that is something possible, because you see, repentance can take place in all parts of the world, wherever you are. This is just a further bonus which is given to people who are able to do so. But as I said, even people who are not able to do so, and they are able to, they repent from wherever they are, in spite of having the desire to go to a sacred place to repent. I said that they might have perhaps the same opportunity from God, because God looks at your intentions, and if you have that intense desire of being there, and you're not able to reach there, and still you at your own place you undergo that repentance process, of course that is something which is which we do sincerely hope will be equally acceptable to the Almighty.
The question is that why it happens particularly in our villages that parents kill their children, their daughters, brothers kill their sisters because they marry out of their own choice. Has Allah not allowed us to choose our spouses, or is it because these people are not educated that this is happening? Because every day in the paper there is some story of someone being killed because the girl married out of her own choice.
So this is an extremely unfortunate situation. This is basically a tribal tradition, and just as this tribal tradition existed in other forms in the times of the Prophet, when newborn girls were actually just buried alive, and there was this practice went on unchecked. Similarly, this is a heinous practice which goes on today in the name of religion and in the name of honor. No one has the right to take the life of any person, and this is not even, I mean, this is something which is so evil, it's so bad that one shudders at the punishment which such a person might go through. No one has the right. Of course, you're absolutely right in saying that choosing one's spouse or choosing one's career or choosing one's life in any way is the prerogative of the individual himself or herself. No one has the authority to decide on behalf of that person. And as I said, it has got nothing to do with religion. It's a very evil tribal practice which has infiltrated in our society because of the fact that we still have those tribal customs rampant in our society, and we need to get rid of them. And our courts and our social structure and fabric has to be in a manner in which this is immediately brought to an end and justice is meted out to such individuals. And of course, in our educational system and in our own instructional phases, we have to educate people how bad these things are and how heinous this is that you take the life of an individual, and that too of your own sister or your daughter or anyone is so closely related to you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I have Miss Adila Asad. I'm going to unmute your mic. So please go ahead now.
Hi, sir. Yeah, you were teaching us about the rights of the parents a few weeks ago, the hukuk jo hote hain parents ke. I was just wondering these rights, these hukuk, because I know few people who are raised by not by their parents passed away by their grandparents or by their khalas, or some adopted kids. So would those rights apply to them as well as parents?
Yes, by analogy, they should apply to them, because you see, parents who raise them, who nurture them, who nourish them, of course, real parents might have some advantage because of the fact a real parent carries a child. A mother carries a child in her body and she nurses her a lot. So the amount of service and labor that she goes through is unimaginable, and it cannot be replicated. But having said that, other individuals, like maybe your close relatives, like your aunts and uncles or your grandparents, if they treat you and they are able to nourish you, they of course will have those same rights and of respect, of honor. And of course this goes without saying, because a human being is made in a fashion that whenever he or she undergoes such behavior, this reciprocation is something which is very natural. And so if yes, I would say that they would carry the same rights.
There was a case where I know a girl, she was adopted, but she didn't know that she was adopted.
Mm-hmm.
But when she found out, she was kind of rebellious.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I was wondering, that now what rights does her parents have on her?
You see, for a child who is adopted, when she or he grows up and he feels that this is something which he would not like, so of course this is his or her right to come out of that bond. He or she was cared upon by their parents, but they have done their what they wanted, what best they could do. But this does not mean that it's a one-sided affair. To live together as a family, especially for an adopted child, it has to be both ways. Obviously, she must have this rebellious behavior might have some other roots as well. But basically, she would have wanted herself to be out of this bond, and the person who would have wanted to live independently. So as far as the behavior is concerned, one would have counseled that young lady or that woman that she should be very polite. But it is her right to disentangle herself from the family at the same time. So it's like saying that if something has happened which was beyond that lady or that girl, this is something which she should actually, she has the right to untie that knot. But what has happened is something which she should be thankful of, because she has been reared by someone on all those times when she might have been in a sort of bother, and they have taken care of themselves. So while at the same time being polite, she has that right to come out of that situation as well.
Okay, I understand. Can I ask one more question?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, because it was regarding Hajj. Hajj is farz, we all know that, and if you have the capacity, you should do it. But there are some people who, even they can go, they have the capacity to go, but they still don't go. How do you explain that, or how do you explain that farz? They don't believe that, for certain reasons, they don't believe they should go. It's difficult for them because they're too old, or there's no one to go with them.
So I think that all this has to be decided by the person himself. We are no judge of people. Let people decide for themselves. All that we can tell people is that this is something which the Almighty has made mandatory upon every Muslim who has the wherewithal, who has the means. And means does not merely mean the wealth that we have. It of course means the health. It means the strength to go through that very, very exacting worship ritual. And that's all I think that we should say. And people, of course, generally know this, but judging people that why are they not going, or what's making them not go, is something, this is beyond us. This should not be our problem. It should not be our issue. Let that person decide. All that we can do is bring before him what the Almighty has required of him, and that too in a very wise way and at opportune times. But let that person decide, because ultimately it's God who's going to judge that person, not ourselves.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I don't see any more questions. Is Miss Farah Naz Sahiba, is that you who has raised her? You have Farah Naz Sahiba, is it, do you want to ask a question? Okay, it seems that it was done mistakenly. Okay, thank you very much, viewers. Inshallah, see you next week, same day. Have a good weekend, and until the next time, it is Khuda Hafiz.